President Trump is featured prominently in a new release of files related to disgraced financier and sexual predator Jeffrey Epstein. In an email from 2020, a New York prosecutor says Trump flew on Epstein's plane many more times than was previously reported. The release also contains a note, apparently from Epstein, that references the president's love for young girls. White House columnist Niall Standish joins us to discuss. Hey, Niall, so what do you make of this latest release?
I think the top line here, Drew, is that this tranche of documents is far more problematic for President Trump than the first batch was. Remember, the first batch barely mentioned him. Here, this is very different. Now, to be clear, we have to emphasize that many of these things are at best unproven. President Trump has never been charged with any criminal wrongdoing in the Epstein matter. He vigorously denies any wrongdoing. But even the email that you cited in the introduction from the prosecutor, referencing the fact that Trump apparently was on Epstein's jet much more frequently than they had been aware even in 2020. That's the kind of detail that is politically problematic for President Trump, no doubt.
On the issue of Trump flying on Epstein's plane, does this release change what was previously known about that?
As I understand it, Drew, in the interim between the email being sent in 2020 and now, these details had begun to emerge in terms of the number of times the president had flown on the plane. But there are other details in that email that, to my knowledge, were not public. For example, there's one reference to a flight where the only passengers were Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump, and an unnamed 20-year-old. I don't think we knew that that was the case. The 20-year-old's name is redacted even in the current release. But again, these things just sort of fuel the suspicion that there may be something more to be uncovered here, even as President Trump denies that.
Another one of those emails referenced, or another one of those flights referenced in those emails includes a flight where it was just President Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, in addition to the other email that was referenced where it was apparently the three of them, including that unnamed 20-year-old girl. Is the White House disputing this? Do they admit that Trump flew on the plane, including those times where it was just he and Epstein and the girl?
In the instant aftermath of this current release, they have not commented, at least so far. So as far as we speak right now, there has been no commentary on that. It's notable, perhaps, that on Monday, President Trump at Mar-a-Lago was sort of almost coming to the defense of Bill Clinton, who, of course, had been mentioned, and there'd been photographs of Clinton in the first tranche of documents. Trump basically arguing that people who were, as he put it, innocently socializing with Jeffrey Epstein were getting caught up in this. Then, in addition, we have the statement from the Department of Justice, I think you referenced it in the introduction, saying that there were sensationalist claims made in this second batch of material, and that in the DOJ's opinion, many of the claims made against Trump are simply untrue.
There is also included in this batch a letter which is reportedly, supposedly, from Jeffrey Epstein to Larry Nassar. Nassar is a convicted child serial molester, former team doctor of the U.S. women's national gymnastics team, currently serving what is essentially a life sentence in prison. The letter is postmarked on August 13th of 2019. That is 3 days after Epstein was found dead in his cell. The letter references President Trump's love for young girls. What do we know about this letter, and is there any pushback from the White House on that being authentic?
I think that the pushback would come under the heading of that broad Department of Justice statement about sensationalist or untrue allegations. This letter that you reference is, I think, one of the most enigmatic pieces of material released here, because it would appear to be, as you say, a letter from Jeffrey Epstein to Larry Nassar, who was convicted of horrendous crimes. And in it, Epstein, apparently perhaps alluding to his own suicide, says something to the effect of he was taking the short route home. But then he goes on, or the letter purportedly from Epstein goes on to say that President Trump shares their love of young, nubile girls. If that letter is genuine, if it is indeed from Jeffrey Epstein to Larry Nassar, pretty creepy, I would say. Doesn't prove that the allegation is accurate, of course, but pretty creepy and not the kind of phrase that anyone, President of the United States or otherwise, would like attached to them.
You talked about this Justice Department statement warning that these documents contain untrue and sensationalist claims. Do you think it's a pretty extraordinary case there where you have, on one hand, the department releasing these documents, and on the other hand, kind of preemptively putting out this statement that of all the people that are included, the President Trump basically, didn't do anything wrong here? What do you make of that?
I think it is an attempt to limit the political damage from this release. The legal questions are their own category, but there is, I think, potential political damage simply by Trump's name coming up so frequently in these documents. That statement that you referenced there from the DOJ is obviously intended to mitigate that damage. And, I would imagine that President Trump will be displeased that this material has come out at all, so the DOJ's actions have to be seen in that light. One other point briefly, Drew, is of course this latest tranche of documents dropping just 2 days before Christmas Day, at a time when I would say large swathes of the public are paying less attention to the news than they otherwise would. That also seems to me significant.
There had been complaints that the Trump administration wasn't complying with the law passed by Congress demanding the release of Epstein files. Do you think this will quell that concern? Does this suggest that the administration is complying, considering that it is releasing information that could be seen as potentially damaging to the president?
Yeah, for a start, the mere fact that these latest documents came out somewhat unexpectedly, I think, could be used to argue that they are complying. The argument about compliance, briefly, Drew, is there was a deadline. It has now passed for the release of all documents. So in one sense, the DOJ has breached that legislation. On the other, everyone agrees, regardless of their political affiliation, that we don't want victims mistakenly identified here, or we don't want people's privacy invaded whenever they have done nothing wrong and perhaps been victimized by Jeffrey Epstein. So there is work to be done in redacting for honorable reasons here, and I think that's why the DOJ would say they have missed a full release by the date of the initial deadline.
All right, it's a story we will continue to follow. I know you're working on some reporting on it, so we'll let you get back to that. Niall Stanage, thanks so much for taking some time to talk with us.
Thanks, Drew.